Today, I want to talk about Joe Kent. And the reason why is because it would not be an overstatement to say that Joe Kent's recent resignation, and if you do not know, he basically was the leader of counterterrorism in the United States. He resigned from his position, and this is extremely consequential because of the way in which he resigned and what he had to say when leaving his post. Because he basically wrote a letter and said, this is explicitly why I'm leaving. And it was because of the Iran war. And the thing about it is first of all, it is very important because it is the most high-profile resignation, not just in wartime, but given what he cited in leaving, is quite frankly mind-boggling. But then adding to it, because I already wanted to cover that story because just by itself it's very important, but then the next day he goes to interview with Tucker Carlson, who I think Tucker has been one of the most prominent, if not the most prominent voice, anti-war voice, and advocating for what I think is the best, what is in the best interest of the average American. I think the Iran war does absolutely nothing for us. But he goes on an interview with him. They go through his entire letter. And so Joe Kent not only further expands on his reasoning for leaving, but then he also, and this is very important, brings up possible ties to Charlie Kirk's assassination. And to say that it is a scorching rebuke of the FBI and other organizations within the government would be underselling the importance and the, frankly, insanity of the claims. And to be completely transparent, I think he could be absolutely correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at a video that breaks down this interview and then a lot of things surrounding it, and then I'll provide my viewpoints on it as well. Hi there, pardon the interruption. I just wanted to make a real quick ask that if you are watching my content and you appreciate it, if you could please drop me a subscription. As you can see, through the life of my channel, 95% of the people that watch my content are not subscribed. So if you are watching and you find yourself enjoying the content, I would ask that you drop a subscription. Just, again, a really quick PSA, it would mean a lot to me. It really does help my channel grow, and it allows me to make this something that I can do for a living. So just wanted to take a real quick interruption, and I'll return you back to my video. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy.
Turning now to Tucker Carlson's interview with Joe Kent. So first we're going to start here with some news at the top. Let's put it up here on the screen. Breaking from Semaphore last night. Joe Kent is now under FBI investigation for allegedly leaking classified information. I'm told the investigation predates his departure. I'm sure it does. I'm sure that it does.
You called that one immediately.
Somebody actually tweeted out a clip of our segment, and I checked the time. I think we recorded it 8 minutes after he resigned, and I was like, they're going to indict him. Yeah. And I know the playbook. You know why? Because it happened to Dan Caldwell. And what happened with Dan Caldwell? They accused him of being a leaker. He was fired. They drug his name through the mud. And just yesterday, it was announced that he's been completely cleared of all wrongdoing, and that the ODNI polygraphed and has restated his security clearance to be allowed back into the government.
Incredible.
So just so you're all aware about the last time they said somebody with some anti-war sympathies and accused him of being a leaker.
Here's the other thing about this, because you have to realize that, yes, he left, and Sagar did call it, right? Because I think I actually covered the video where he said that, or at least I had at least watched it. But yeah, he did exactly say, yes, this is what's going to happen to him. But even if that was not originally in the plans, right? If he did walk away and they weren't going to do, they weren't actually going to go after him, you had to know, if you have watched the Tucker Carlson interview with him, again, the revelations that came out of that, they may not have originally, it might have been kind of they're teetering back and forth or whatever, but there is no way that after that interview aired, they were not going to go after him 100%. And they can make up whatever, this was pre-planned, this was before his departure even happened. That's total BS. That makes absolutely no sense. Again, if you watch the actual Tucker interview, which we're going to cover here, but if you go watch the entire thing, he basically scorches them, and it does not make them look good at all. Like, it's really crazy. So, of course they're going to go after him. They probably were going to go after him from the beginning anyway, not just because the military-industrial complex doesn't like when people step out of line. And so, of course, they want to destroy them. But also because, as I said in my intro, this is one of the most, if not the most consequential stepping down, right, resignations in the history of the United States government. Like, basically by him doing this is like double FU flipping off Trump and his entire, military administration. Like, that's how bad this actually is. And so, once again, like I said, before even the Tucker interview, I wanted to cover it because it is such a big deal. So, yes, that is to say they were probably going to go after him from the beginning. But, again, after the Tucker interview came out, there's no way they're going to let him. They're coming after him full bore.
This is obviously complete bullshit. FBI, Keystone Cash, and all of these other people claiming that this is some, a leak. Listen, I knew it was coming. They cannot let this slide. Why? Because Joe is too important. He's too important. He's the biggest voice. Historically, no sub-cabinet official, remember, Senate confirmed, has ever resigned in protest over a war, like not in Vietnam, not in Iraq. I mean, this is Daniel Ellsberg level of coming out and the courage to do so. I mean, look, no hate to Ellsberg, who I love, but he waited until the 1970s to come out. We're talking about in the mix.
Yeah.
Said this is a nightmare, a disaster, and I cannot in good conscience.
It reminds me of some of like the Watergate resignations, like that kind of parallel. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, and the thing to call out about that is that the parallels to this are, because if you're talking about Vietnam, right? Yes, the parallels and how bad this could go ultimately. It could be astronomically terrible. I will go on the record right now saying that this could end up absolutely worse than Vietnam. Especially if you're looking at what's the finality, what are the outcomes that could emerge in the wake of the war, right? If there is the collapse of, because I think it's very possible, the collapse of the petrodollar, right? So if the Middle East, because now there are, basically Iran is saying, we'll let anyone come through the Strait of Hormuz if you trade in Chinese currency. So if you basically abandon the dollar, and which would functionally destroy the petrodollar, then you can use the Strait of Hormuz again. And the thing is with that is that would be a catastrophic. Basically, that would destroy the United States dollar as being the reserve currency for the entire world. That would be like catastrophic. And by the way that we are hanging out our GCC allies to dry and taking basically the anti-missile capabilities and systems and moving them to try and defend Israel, that's pissing them off as well. So that's another possibility. Or the GCC countries have to withdraw their money from the US stock market to pay for their own defenses. There are so many possibilities that just destroy the petrodollar. And if that happens, that basically destroys the American empire and our currency being the reserve currency for the world. So that, again, that's just one outcome, and there are many other scenarios like that, but that's just one where there's like 4 different ways that you end up with that outcome, and they're all very real scenarios. So when you're seeing that is why I say this could 100% be worse than Vietnam, because Vietnam, we kind of limped off and we're licking our wounds, and it was a black eye for the United States. But this scenario, this war, has the possibility of completely collapsing the U.S. and our standing as the top, basically on top of the rest of the world, or at the top of the rest of the world. And I don't think that's a hyperbolic statement at all.
Believe this administration, and I think you're probably right that the allegations are complete bullshit that he was a leaker. If he did leak, though, I wouldn't blame him. I mean, he was banging his head against the wall, watching according to what he said and what Marco Rubio and others have basically confirmed, that watching the Israelis come in and lie to the president about what an imminent threat Iran is, blah blah blah. There was, according to Kent, and we'll play these clips for you in a moment, there was a lot of debate leading up to the 12-day war, leading up to this one.
Yeah, and a huge component of that, too, that you have to think about is that he could have leaked, who knows. I kind of doubt it, because if you actually watch the interview, although maybe he thought he wasn't going to get caught, and so there is a world where, yes, he did actually leak. Again, I think all of the incentives are for the government to just make up baseless claims and to try and smear him, to try and play it off that this isn't what it actually is, which is immensely catastrophic for them and makes them look awful in general. But yes, exactly to that point of, if you were to, so in the interview with Tucker, there were a lot of things where he's like, oh yeah, I can't say that because it's still classified or whatever. So that makes me think that he is principled enough that he probably didn't leak, but you could see a world where he did, because kind of exactly to Crystal's point here, if he's saying, I tried to talk to Trump myself, I tried to do everything internally, but they're just not listening to me, so what are the other things that I can do to try and basically build public sentiment against, or get someone else to take action or whatever, because he doesn't want to go into this war, which has been his stance for the entirety of time since he was appointed. So yes, I'm just saying I could see a world where that is the case, because he's trying to do everything he can within his power. It seems like they're not listening to him. As a last ditch effort, he tries to leak something and get certain information out to people, and then as the final last ditch effort, the final thing is then he resigns with his resignation letter, where he basically just absolutely scorches the entire government, says that this is the worst war and we absolutely should not have went into war with Iran, and again, one thing after another. He basically just absolutely debased them. They'll cover the entirety of the letter later, but exactly in this case, that is why I say, of course, it is possible that he did it. But again, after watching the Tucker interview, I kind of view him as someone who I don't think his character, he would actually do that. Again, it's so hard to say. There's just a huge absence of information, and I could see either scenario being possible.
Anyone who would have been a dissenting voice was just completely and utterly shut out. Mm-hmm. So if he wanted to try to influence the president, his only path would have been to go to the press. So again, I'm not saying he did that. I remain very skeptical of these claims. But if he did, I would see that as, a patriotic act of him trying to prevent what he knew to be a disastrous war.
And the other thing that would make me kind of hesitant to believe that he would have leaked it is that it seems like all the press basically eats this up. and is all, basically gung-ho for it because everyone is bought and paid for by the military-industrial complex. That's why they didn't bring forth the vote for the War Powers Act. That's why, because both sides are bought and paid for. Everyone is fully on board with war all the time. So what outlet would he realistically leak to? Like, basically CNN was just bought by Larry Ellison, well, his son. But so everything is all hyper right aligned or just goes along with military industrial complex anyway. And so there's no, who would he leak to? Again, who would be sympathetic to him saying anti-war things? Absolutely no one. So yes, I that's another reason why I'm not certain that he actually would have leaked anyway. That's another point against it.
Trying to get around, this wall that had been built. And, Trump is responsible for the fact, by the way, that wall is built and that he surrounded himself with complete sycophants who were just telling him what he wanted to hear about how great this war would be and how easy it would be and how the regime would topple immediately, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so let's get actually into some of the clips here from the interview. E2, let's start with this declarative statement from a man with the highest security clearance in the United States government, National Counterterrorism Director, as of a couple of days ago. Iran was not an imminent threat to the United States. Let's take a listen.
Was Iran on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon?
No, they weren't, 3 weeks ago when this started, and they weren't in June either. I mean, the Iranians have had a religious ruling, a fatwa, against actually developing a nuclear weapon since 2004. That's been in place since 2004. That's available in the public sphere. But then also we had no intelligence to indicate that fatwa was being disobeyed or it was on the cusp of being lifted. The Iranian strategy, it's actually pretty pragmatic. The Iranians are obviously aware of what's taking place in their region, and their strategy was to not completely abandon their nuclear program because they saw what happened to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya when he said, hey, I've got no more nukes. I'll do what you say. I'll give up my nukes.
And we gave him the Nobel Peace Prize?
Yeah, we regime changed him, and he was executed by his own people in the most horrific way.
Oh, sodomized by a bayonet, right.
The Iranians' position, when viewed from the lens of the region, was actually fairly pragmatic. They were preventing themselves from developing a bomb, but they still wanted the ability. They wanted the ability to enrich. They wanted the ability to have some components so that they weren't completely stripped of it. And when we always assessed that they were either several months or a year, 2 years away from actually being able to develop a nuclear weapon. And that's not because the Iranians are stupid people. I think we can tell right now that the Iranians are anything but stupid. They had the ability, I think, that the brain power to actually develop one, or they could have simply traded a ton of oil with Pakistan or with someone else to actually get a nuclear weapon. They were not doing that. We had no intelligence to indicate that they were.
And here's, I think, the most important thing to realize about this, because some people make the point, they enriched to 60% or what. They've been enriched to 60% for, I believe it's 14 years now, because I believe it was 2012 when Bibi Netanyahu went to our government and held up the stupid picture of that bomb of here's 60%, and then they can get up to 90%, I think it is, that you need to be able to create a nuclear weapon. So exactly as Joe Kent is saying there, yes, it is completely possible that they're tightrope. They're basically walking a tightrope where they're saying we don't want to create one because of religious ideologies, and people say, they're enriched to 60%. Again, they've been enriched to 60% for 14 years. So given that time frame, at any point in time, they could have just speed run up to that point in time, up to 90%, if that was actually their goal. I mean, you can just look at it right now. They're holding their own. We have not completely, basically decapitated their ability to attack Israel or any of the GCC countries. We attack them. They attack the enemies in the region. And they're very restrained, and they obviously have a bunch of intelligence. And so, again, as was said there, they're not a stupid country, as the United States likes to paint everyone in that region. That's not Israel. That's absolutely not real at all. So yes, they probably were okay. We want to have the ability to, if essentially what is going on right now, if we in bad faith attack them 2 times, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, and we're not going to fool them again. So now I would believe they're fully incentivized to sprint from that 60% now up to creating a nuclear device, which, given that timeline, could be within a couple months or up to a couple years. Or they just trade a bunch of oil and get a nuke from an already nuclear armed ally or friendly country, or however you want to frame that. Or they're just gifted one from China or Russia or North Korea or another country that doesn't want to see them basically get completely overthrown, which I don't think is really a realistic threat anyway, but we'll leave that aside. So, again, the argument that, oh no, they had 60%, they were going there anyway. No, I think it was a very strategic decision. And, by the way, it was fully on the table that we could go and inspect and, make sure that they were not continuing to enrich past a certain point and whatever. So please spare me. That was never actually on the table. They were allowing us to make sure that it wasn't on the table. They were giving us access to oversee it. And so that's just a complete joke. And anytime I hear that argument, it's like, obviously you don't know the actual timeline and how long they've been enriched at 60%, because they easily could have made it up to 90% if that was their actual goal at any point in time in the last 14 years. So spare me. That's a complete farce. That's not a realistic argument. And that's pretty much all I have to say about that.
Does that sound like a bunch of religious fanatics who don't think, or what do they say? They're a theocracy. They want the end times. They hate us all very much. What do you hear from that?
Also
Highly pragmatic?
Mm-hmm.
And the funniest thing about the end times comment there is that we and Israel are the ones that are trying to push that to our militaries. To basically, they're trying to bring about the Antichrist. That's literally Pete Hegseth has told the generals that. And the generals have been basically, I don't know if they actually said the Antichrist. I think that's the actual interpretation of it. But the second coming of Jesus, and then rapture everyone, and there you go. So make no mistake about it, when, yes, we are trying to frame them. It's very much the pot trying to call the kettle black, in that we're just projecting what our actual goals are. And if you do not believe me, you can look up videos of, oh yeah, we have procured 3 red heifers and they've actually been shipped to Israel. And it is frankly insane. I didn't believe it when I first saw it, but you can look up any number of videos that actually take a very in-depth look at exactly this. That, oh yeah, we are actually trying to bring about the end times. And again, whether that's just some sort of framing to get people to go out and do war on behalf of us and motivate them, or whether this is actually what they believe, who knows? But it's quite frankly insane, and it seems to be more what we are doing than what we are accusing them of doing. Seems like they just kind of wanted to be left alone, and we didn't want any part of that.
You have people who respond to circumstances, thought very deeply about the types of decisions they were making, but most importantly, no imminent threat.
Yeah.
No imminent threat, okay? So what they said is BS, completely. And I know that might be obvious to the viewers of our show in the hopes that this reaches many, many people. Remember that the Pentagon, the White House press secretary.
And the other thing important to call out about that as well, with the no imminent threat line, is yes, exactly, because I have been following this war so closely. If you actually look at it, again, they have been, and I kind of mentioned it before, but they have been very restrained, Iran has, in what they have attacked, how they have attacked. It's literally been, at the onset, yes, okay, the United States hit the girls' school, right? They said that is completely inappropriate. But they have basically only attacked, Iran has only attacked military targets. And then when the US or Israel has striked other things, such as oil reserves, that is when Iran then reciprocates and then starts attacking infrastructure in the GCC countries or whatever, right? Or Israel's infrastructure, or yes, they have attacked the civilian population, but that's because there's been a lot of collateral damage onto Iran as well. So that is the exact point, is that everything that I have seen has been that Iran has been incredibly restrained. So yeah, they're very calculated. It's not like they're just going and lashing out and, you know, shooting missiles everywhere and destroying civilian population centers, and that's not happening at all, aside from into Israel, because that's exactly what's going on in Iran. So when you're seeing that, I mean, again, how can you really say that, yeah, it's not an imminent threat? And again, to me, just the reading of that, in the fact that they have only been attacking military installations and U.S. military bases throughout the GCC, is that, yes, they have been restrained, it is very calculated, and it is literally just striking back for what the United States and Israel started. And so, yes, they're not irrational actors, which is exactly what our government is trying to sell us, and it's just complete BS, obviously.
The President of the United States, the Secretary of State, all of them have said that this is an imminent threat. And as Kent explains very clearly, the only imminent threat was Israel's imminent threat to the country of Iran, who was then going to attack Israel and, yes, the United States of America bases, which protects Israel. And as a result, we had to go in and preemptively strike Israel's preemption. When you put it that way, it's a real different imminent threat, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, coming out of the mouth of somebody who had access to the intelligence, who was in the room, not for this one, but for the previous one on Midnight Hammer, and he went through some of that, I just have no other conclusion than, like, you have a president who is completely captured here by Israeli interests and logic, and for whatever reason, he refuses to, you know, to say no, as Kent says, is an option. And I'm not blaming Israel. Like, yeah, it's their fault too. But I'm saying Trump is incapable of doing this.
Yeah.
He is incapable. And he has now shown us that. And if you listen to this interview, and we're about to get to even some more shocking stuff around Charlie Kirk and all of that.
And here's the thing about this too, as he said, incapable. Trump is incapable. I think that's the best way to put it. And you can't, I mean, the more this goes on and the more you see Trump actually lash out, like, I should pull up basically a compilation, or I should create one, of all the times where Trump either seems hesitant, or he's lashed out against parties, or he's like, there's been a ton of instances where it's like, oh yeah, here. Like, there have been so many pieces where he's seemed like he doesn't actually want to do this, or he's regretful, or he didn't want to do it in the first place. You have to go back to, what do they have on him? It has to be, in my mind, it has to be 100% the Epstein files. What else could it be? I think it's that, and it could be, and it's very interesting because they talk about this, and it has been in the Joe Kent interview, in the whole thing. But as I called out, it could also, and this is what Joe Kent said as a possibility, he could be threatened, Israel could be threatening him with assassination. Again, the whole Butler thing, it was fishy. We never really actually got any closure. The guy didn't have any social media presence. The stuff that has been dug up seemed very radical, and the lack of it out there seems to be that there was probably some sort of cover-up or deletion. So again, just very weird things going on with that. and no real explanation. The curved roof, like if you look into it, it's patently insane. So it could be a threatening of Trump's life, but I also think 100%, because you'd be like, oh, well, I just hide in the Oval Office and then, Secret Service, we basically go destroy Israel because they're threatening our lives. And then, there could be a way to deal with that. So it has to be, they have dirt on him from Epstein as well, which would completely sink him. He would literally be locked up. Even as the president, he would be kicked out of office, impeached, and it would be devastating, and he would be locked up for the rest of his days. That is literally I think the core. Yes, there could be an assassination component to it as well, but it has to be Epstein files. There's literally no explanation. That's my opinion. I have called it out before, but the longer this goes on and the more insane things you see where he lashes out against people who dragged him into this war or gave him bad information or whatever it is. It is not an exaggeration to say, I think he's literally going to go down as the worst president in history.
I do not have another conclusion than that. That is the only conclusion I can draw.
Well,
he's terrified. He's either terrified or he agrees. I don't know what's worse.
Right.
I prefer terrified, because at least maybe we could get out of that.
We still see Trump parroting these insane...
And that's the exact point that I'm making there of, if it was just assassination, there's a way to get out of that. I don't think that's what it is, though. I absolutely do not. And so I'm curious to see what happens with Israel, and if Bibi has been killed. Does that loosen the grip on Trump at all? Who knows? I have no idea. I kind of doubt it, because there's a bunch of people in Mossad, and so there is a way that still continues to put pressure on him. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I really do not, because again, there's a way to get out of it if it's just an assassination threat. But if it's an Epstein thing, there's no way to get out of that as long as Israel still exists. So, again, very, very interesting to see how that exactly plays out.
Israeli talking points. It was deeply disturbing to me when he said that the pro-government demonstrations in the street, that they were fake, that they were AI. And look, I don't know what he believes and what are lies or whatever. But it seemed to me like he actually believed that, or at least he believed it had enough credibility to repeat it to the American public. That comes directly from the Israelis. So there's no doubt, the influence campaign that they successfully launched here. And I want to pair.
I think the thing is with that is that a big issue, in my opinion, is he just runs with whatever fits the narrative that he's trying to portray. I mean, think about in the lead up to the election, right? With the debate with Kamala Harris where he was they're eating the dogs and cats. Again, it's just something that he saw that is super online, and it's a narrative that he thinks that he can push out there. And he's super old. I think he's starting to show signs of where, obviously not to the level that Biden was at, but the dude's old. He's decrepit. He's starting to become decrepit, in my opinion. So he's going to just go along with whatever narrative that he believes. And I don't even think that one is necessarily that outlandish. I mean, obviously, it's factually inaccurate. But the thing is, with AI, it's so hard to know what's actually real or not. So if he is wants to believe, if it's in his best interest to believe, or he's surrounded by people who are telling him that, that has to be AI. AI slop is everywhere. And it's so hard. Again, when I'm trying to understand what is actually going on, I will see things where it's like, oh no, that, you see a bombing of Israel, and then immediately people are trying to disprove it. No, those missiles didn't hit, it's AI. And then you see a couple days later, no, it actually is proven to be true. And so you'll see it in, there's stages, and everyone has a vested interest in trying to, the easiest attack on anything that makes you look bad is just to call it AI, because anything could plausibly be AI. And so, yeah, if, you see Tel Aviv getting completely flattened, well, if you don't want that narrative getting out there and you don't want anyone to know the actual casualties, well, then you just say, oh, no, it's AI. Okay, like, how do you disprove that? What's the actual argument against it? And so, yeah, you can just basically call anything AI to try and straw man it, to say, no, that's not actually what happened, because that makes us look bad. And so that is the thing of, like, you have to give people who are reporting on things some modicum of grace, because how can you actually know when everyone's just trying to disprove everything that makes them look bad by calling it AI? And so exactly to this point of, the people surrounding him may have told him it was AI, and so that's what he comes out saying. And it could be like Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and whoever is in the administration. And so, that's what they're trying to feed him to make him feel better about his decision, as he is probably feeling pretty bad about it, because now the stock market is tanking, energy prices are soaring through the roof. Like, all these things are really bad. And that's what Trump prides himself on the stock market. And look what's happening now. So, again, all of that is to say it could be something that is being fed to him, and that could be what he believes, but it's just a very hard situation that anyone who is covering this finds themselves in, because you see something and then you might report on it, or you might believe it, and then later it comes out that someone's trying to disclaim it and call it AI, but then it comes out again that it actually isn't AI, and all you have to see is one time. It's confirmation bias, where you see what you want to see, and you don't listen to the next thing that comes out that actually it was real all along. And it's a very challenging situation that anyone who is especially trying to come out on the cutting edge of things and report things as they're happening, it's just very hard to do that in today's age.
Joe Kent's comments there about how no imminent threat, no, they were not developing a nuclear weapon. That is not what we assessed at all. With Tulsi Gabbard's testimony yesterday, where she was asked about this as well, John Ossoff pressed her on, listen, you said last summer this nuclear threat was obliterated, that their nuclear program was obliterated. So what's going on here? This is D1. Let's listen to that.
That opening statement, as submitted to the committee in advance of this hearing, stated that as a result of last summer's airstrikes, quote, Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated, end quote, correct?
That's right.
And is that in fact the assessment of the intelligence community?
Yes.
So the assessment of the intelligence community is that Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated by last summer's airstrikes?
Yes.
And the opening statement you submitted to the committee last night also stated, quote, there has been no effort since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability, end quote, correct?
That's right.
And that's the assessment of the intelligence community.
Yes.
The White House stated on March 1st of this year that this war was launched and was, quote, a military campaign to eliminate the imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, end quote. That's a statement from the White House. Quote, the imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime. Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was an imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime?
The intelligence community assessed that Iran maintained the intention to rebuild and to continue to grow their nuclear enrichment capability.
Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, yes or no?
Senator, the only person who can determine what is and is not an imminent threat is the president.
False.
And that's complete BS, because, like, literally it is saying the exact opposite of what the White House was saying when they went into it. So they're saying, you literally heard him ask her like 4 different times, you said there was no threat, you said there was no way, you said it was completely destroyed, you said, like, basically leading her to the fact of there's no way they could possibly get, because it is probably sitting under a bunch of rubble. And I think even Iran has said that as well. Like, yes, okay, we do not actually have access to it. If you want to go try and retrieve it, we could basically, it would take ground troops and we could destroy you. Basically, it would be feeding them into a shooting gallery to try and retrieve all of that material, right? That nuclear material that they had enriched. That's just basically as it stands right now. That's my understanding of it. So she's basically admitting all of that, and then she says, "Oh no, the president can make up his mind based on the information that we gave him, even though all the information that you gave him was that they do not have the ability to retrieve it." I mean, I guess eventually they could, right? But they would have to dig it out, and then that would expose them, and so it's not realistic that they could really go and get it. And then, yeah, it just, again, it just shows what a joke it absolutely is, and what a joke she is, to be quite frank. Like, she's pissed me off so much because she was so anti-war, and you just hope that, oh yeah, Trump picked her for this position, and so they were going to be good on wars, they were going to be anti-war, but then they're all completely full of shit. And that just proves it right there. And I'm glad that they included it in this segment, because I think it is something that I pseudo wanted to cover, but there's so many other things that are very important along with this war that needed to be covered. But it's nice to have the little snippet of there, so you just see how completely stupid she sounds, and it's completely indefensible what she's trying to say here.
She won't say it. She said, "Oh, well, that's not really my job. That's up to the president."
The only person who can determine imminent threat is the president. No, not
that's
true.
Literally your job.
Yes.
That is your job, is to determine, which she knows, but she's unwilling to just outright lie. So she dodges by saying, well, the president in all his brilliance and glory and magnificence, he's the one that we have to defer to, and only he can really, with his magical abilities, can really determine whether this was a threat to the United States. And I want to emphasize one other aspect of the testimony there in the exchange with John Ossoff. He says, in your written testimony, you talked about how there had been no efforts since the nuclear enrichment was supposedly obliterated to try to rebuild their enrichment capability. That was in the written testimony. She chose not to say that when she actually gave her opening statement. That was omitted because, again, that's very uncomfortable for this administration in all of their many layered lies and rationales for why we're now in this disastrous war.
And she's actually literally testifying as you and I are talking, and she just continues to say, she's like, the ODNI is not my personal view. This is the view of the intelligence community, and the president is the one who can make the imminent threat decision. Now, to the point that I made earlier about Israeli capture, Joe went into great detail about what that looked like inside the information environment in the lead up to this war. Let's take a listen.
But I know how this works. I know the Israeli officials, some in intelligence, some in government, will come to U.S. government officials, and they will say all kinds of things that we know from our intelligence just simply isn't true. And they'll say, hey, I'm giving you a preview. It's not in intelligence channels yet, but here's what's going to happen. And that doesn't usually come to
Wait a second. I mean, I thought that U.S. policymakers made their decisions on the basis of intelligence collected and or vetted by our intelligence. That's why we have intelligence agencies that soak up hundreds of billions a year. But you're saying that Israeli officials short-circuited the entire U.S. government and just went right to American policymakers and said, it doesn't matter what your country says, here's what we know? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, usually they're pretty slick, and they'll say, hey, this isn't in intelligence channels yet because it's going to take some time to get there. And here they're on the cusp of building a bomb. They're going to, I don't know, you pick your topic. A lot of times they'll sample different things until they find what sticks.
Sample different things until they find what sticks. So it's not intelligence, it's propaganda. He also talked about how he would hear things from the Israelis, and then on the next day, he would hear it on Mark Levin's show or in the Wall Street Journal or by Mark Dewitz, anybody from the Israel lobby.
And I think the most important part about that clicked something in my brain is if you think about Venezuela, if you think about the messaging for Iran, if you think about any of these sorts of basically military adventures that we have gotten ourselves into, that tracks with exactly what the messaging has been, where it comes out of the White House, or you just hear Trump talk about it, and he's like, well, it's about the oil. Well, it's about nukes. Well, it's about imminent threat to Israel. Well, it's about, like, it feels like he's just throwing things at the wall. And so what that reads to me is that's validating exactly what Joe is saying there. In that, yeah, they constantly throw things at him in hopes that one of them sticks as a justification. And so when you're seeing that, Trump doesn't have the internal filter where he just picks the one that makes the most sense to him. It's literally going in one side of, Israel talking in his ear, and then coming out the other side, which is his mouth, and he's just telling us exactly every single thing that it's this, it's this, it's this, it's this, it's this. So that it makes so much more sense now how, and I think it seems like all of the hawks in our government, so like when we were ramping up for Venezuela, they were probably doing the exact same thing, like a Marco Rubio, right? Where he's doing the same thing to Trump. Oh, it's the narco terrorism, it's the oil, they just constantly were throwing out different excuses for why we were going to go take a military action against Venezuela or Iran now or whatever it is. And again, where there may have been filters for previous presidents, well, Trump just literally just says it as it comes into him. It comes into him, and then he just parrots it right back out to the American public. And to anyone who is paying attention to it and seeing all of his justifications and the evolution of them, and I won't even say evolution, because it's not even an evolution. It's literally just it feels like whiplash, where it's like, well, no, we're doing this. No, we're actually going to do it because of a totally different reason. No, now we're doing it for a totally different reason. Like, the justifications have been all over the place. And to me, they've made no sense because there's no coherent through line for any of them. And so, yes, that is why now that makes so much more sense. And quite frankly, when I'm putting together the big picture of it, is why I am much more willing to believe the things that Joe Kent says, because I go, oh, obviously that's why Trump has been acting in this way and has constantly changed his justification for why we need to go into, again, name your military adventure story that we have basically forayed into since Trump has come back into office. Literally all of them have been handled in this exact same way. And so now it just makes so much more sense. And thank you, Joe, for laying out exactly how this works. And obviously, interested parties within the United States are doing this exact same thing. At least that's the only conclusion that I can take away from it.
I mean, literally out of the book from Professor John Mearsheimer, who we just talked to. This is the Israel lobby, the most sophisticated lobby in now, I would say, the history of mankind, the co-option of a U.S. superpower. And that does not in any way absolve Donald Trump from allowing himself to be lobby controlled or whatever here by the Israelis. I want to make that very clear. But I think whenever we play this next one, honestly, this was the most shocking part. I plan on spending a decent amount of time on this in our interview with Joe Kent, which is currently scheduled for tomorrow, is his discussion around the circumstances of Charlie Kirk's assassination, and then connecting that to Butler, and then connecting that to potentially why this war is happening the way that it is. E4, let's take a listen.
Charlie Kirk is killed publicly in a very horrific way, and we're not really even allowed to look into that at all. And Charlie Kirk was one of President Trump's closest advisors, and he also advocated heavily against a war with Iran. He was in the Oval Office in the lead up to the 12-day war. I wasn't particularly...
And just setting the stage for this, the reason why I think it was so important is because I think Trump rightfully, and J.D. Vance understood, and probably was also telling Trump, the reason why Charlie Kirk was so important was because he drove the youth vote, like, massively. Like, basically, Donald Trump would not have, he may not have won, period, but then he may not have he may have barely squeaked out a win or whatever if it was not for Charlie Kirk. So when you have a voice that is that influential, like basically more influential than probably anyone else, and he is coming out against the Iran, any sort of military conflict with Iran, that is, and you're seeing the restraint. So if you're looking at it in a chronological order, right? Charlie Kirk is coming out massively against the any sort of war with Iran. So in June, they do the 12-day war / we basically send in our bombers, destroy their their nuclear bases, their enrichment areas, all that kind of stuff, right? So we bomb, we kill their nuclear scientists, whatever, right? That action. Then September 10th, Charlie Kirk is assassinated. Then we begin a war with Iran. So the war that we're in now probably wouldn't have happened because Charlie was so vociferously against it, would not be happening if Charlie Kirk was still alive today, in my opinion. Because once again, Charlie Kirk, whatever you think about him, was probably the most singularly influential person to Donald Trump. I think that's inarguable. Again, whatever you think about him. So he could have been the last restraining factor holding back what we're seeing right now. It's hard to say because who knows, different timelines, maybe he's still alive, whatever. But what factually occurred is that it seems like it was restrained in June, then Charlie Kirk's assassinated, and then Bibi Netanyahu, there's a whole lot of weird stuff with that. Bibi Netanyahu issuing a statement immediately after, within minutes of Charlie Kirk's assassination. Kind of weird. And then now we're in war now. A lot of weird stuff. Plus Joe Kent being told he's not allowed to investigate it. Plus, again, I'm just laying the groundwork of why it was so important and why it's so fishy that Charlie Kirk is not allowed to be investigated. And why the timeline playing out. If we went to war with Iran before Charlie Kirk was assassinated, I'd say, whatever, it's not a big deal. The fact that we find ourselves in a war with Iran now, after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, looks a little fishy.
Close with Charlie. He was very gracious to me when I was running for Congress, very, very supportive. So we knew each other. And the last time I saw Charlie Kirk on this earth was in June in the West Wing in the stairway, and I said hi to him, and he looked me in the eye, and he said very loudly, and it's a small. You've been in the West Wing. It's small. It's a tight space, and he said, "Joe, stop us from getting into a war with Iran," very loudly.
He was single-minded,
and he walked off, and he went, I believe, into the Oval. So when one of President Trump's closest advisors, who is vocally advocating for us to not go to war with Iran and for us to rethink at least our relationship with the Israelis. And then he's suddenly publicly assassinated and we're not allowed to ask any questions about that. It's a data point. It's a data point that we need to look into.
What do you mean?
And by the way, who had all of the motivation to do so? Is it maybe the country that dragged us into war with Iran? And just asking questions. What is one of the most prolific countries known for political assassinations? You can look it up. You can probably Google it and you'll get an answer. I'll give you a hint. It's also a country that may have dragged us, probably has dragged us into the war with Iran. Again, I'm putting a bunch of points on a map. You can figure out what you want to draw your conclusions from with that, but it's pretty damning in my opinion.
When you say we're not allowed to ask any questions about that,
we've been told that this individual, Robinson, he's a lone gunman, and maybe he is. But the investigation that I was a part of, the National Counterterrorism Center was a part of, we were stopped from continuing to investigate. And the FBI will say that they stopped that because they wanted to turn everything over to the Utah state authorities. Everything's going to trial. It's very, very sensitive. But there was still a lot for us to look into that I can't really get into. But there was still linkage for us to investigate that we needed to run down. And I'm not making any conclusions. I'm not saying
No, I don't think you are.
because of this happened. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying there's unanswered questions. We know the pressure because of the text messages that have been made public that Charlie was under a lot of pressure from a lot of pro-Israel donors. And again, we know Charlie was advocating to President Trump against this war with Iran.
I'll be honest, that shocked me. As you and I.
And if you watch the whole thing, I actually feel really bad for Tucker because he was actually I think his closest friend, or at least one of them, was probably Charlie Kirk. And so, yeah, you can tell he's pretty shaken up about it. And I think rightfully so, because I think this is basically the confirmation. Once again, because if you're just plotting the points on a map, it's almost undeniable at this point in time. Tucker's not stupid. Obviously, he's not going to be able to actually say it. Joe Kent is not actually going to be able to say it as you see him draw back. And that's why I said originally I don't think that he probably leaked anything because he is restrained and calling out exactly what the reasons are for why he was not, the things that he wanted to look into or the things that were suspicious about the assassination or whatever they were trying to look into. And one of the things he calls out to is there were multiple people who showed a foreknowledge that it was going to happen before it did, and they were not allowed to look into that. So yeah, it is just very, very, again, I just feel for Tucker. Because, yeah, he's not dumb. And when you're seeing all these points on the graph, I think that there's only one conclusion that you can come to. And especially when you're getting essentially reinforcement from someone who is so in the know as Joe Kent.
I know we're not Charlie Kirk conspiracy. We're not Egyptian planes people over here. We covered that story at the time. The NCTC, Joe Kent himself, was blocked by Kash Patel by the FBI. I don't know, man. You listen to that. What conclusion are you going to draw?
Well,
what does he keep hinting at?
You have to read, but not read very much between the lines. But he's saying, look, this is what Charlie said to me. He said, keep us from going to war with Iran. We know that he was under all this pressure from pro-Israel donors. There were some sorts of questions that I had based on tips or whatever intel he had access to of a potential foreign nexus. And I was blocked from being able to continue the investigation. And they said, no, it's going to be just handled at the state level. And any of the queries that he made were just completely stonewalled. So, he's heavily hinting at the possibility that he thinks, which is, this is truly, truly shocking stuff.
I'm kind of two minds about it because I called out in my Charlie Kirk assassination video that, hey, this is insane, but there are things that lead me to believe that Israel is probably behind it. And so, again, vindicating for me, once again, I need to craft some sort of prophet hat for myself. But at the time, it kind of feels insane. But you're looking at, once again, Bibi Netanyahu coming out with a statement immediately after. You're looking at the timeline as I just laid it out. You're looking at a bunch of inconsistencies with the gun that was used, the ammo that was used would have absolutely blown his neck out. There's no way that it would have happened. The ballistics, just so many things did not add up. And a lot of them Candace did call out, the timelines didn't make sense. And that's without some of her more sensationalist claims like the Egyptian planes and that kind of stuff. But just on the base stuff that's oh no, here's the actual facts, a lot of it was not adding up. And so that's why I said, kind of looks like this could be what happened. So again, I feel vindicated, but then what does that actually say? And then what are the outcomes from that? what actually comes out of the knowledge of this. Like, in my opinion, we should be so outraged that we completely cut off all ties with Israel and immediately declare war on them for a political assassination. Like, how is that not the conclusion that we immediately come to? Again, that's just you can come to whatever conclusion you want, but like the totality of the body of evidence, and then even because Breaking Points, I think, has been incredibly careful not to, because they don't want to be seen as kooks. Like, I can say whatever I want because who cares? It's a guy and this is his opinions, and like, I'm not trying to be taken seriously by politicians and all these sorts of people, right? They still want to have some shred of credibility. But to me, I will call a spade, and so even in the immediate aftermath of it, I go, this looks kind of weird. But now you're seeing it's completely vindicated. So again, I feel glad in that sense, but then once again, the darker set of questions set in of, well, this was essentially a political assassination by Israel, and so what do we do with that?
Shocking stuff. And look, it requires a lot of evidence.
Yeah,
right?
no, let's be clear.
Yeah.
Right? The current evidence says what? Tyler Robinson shot Charlie Kirk. Okay, and that's probably the case. The case that he is alluding to is about some potential foreign connection. And again, I want to be clear here. I would never make this statement without the evidence that we now have, which is an allegation made by the National Counterterrorism Director with the highest level of security clearance, who, as reported at the time by the New York Times, was blocked from any foreign connection investigation and is now bringing this up. Not just, I want to be clear too, in his Tucker interview, he brought this up organically. He did not bring it up after Tucker pressed him on the question. It was brought up in context of the Butler assassination attempt and this one. And in both cases, he said we weren't allowed to fully investigate either of those and then he said, I think that President Trump could feel under threat. He is drawing a conclusion in his mind.
Yeah.
He is drawing that. Now, if I do that, I'm a crazy person because I don't have inside information. I'm not in the Situation Room. I haven't seen all this stuff. He has, right?
Yeah.
And so based on that, I mean, man, like, what are we drawing conclusions here for? Like, and I'm trying so hard not to go over the brink here, but this is crazy.
Yeah.
This is crazy.
Well, and one of the things that has been speculated about why Trump decided to get into this insane war was that he believed that the Iranians had been trying to assassinate him. And he said this. He said something to the effect of, I got the Ayatollah before he could get me. So it does seem like, he had some thought in that direction, and that could be a potential motivation. This opens up another question if he felt under threat from the Israelis. I mean, that is what Joe Kent is hinting at here.
Or if you're the Israelis and you're trying to play 4D chess, frame that the Iranians did it when it was actually you all along. Does that make sense? That makes sense to me. Again, you're talking about the country that is known for political assassinations. We're talking about multiple political assassinations or attempted assassinations. And, oh, by the way, wouldn't it behoove them to try and frame Iran and say that they did it to try and get Trump radicalized against them?
Very heavily hinting at here that the threat that Trump could have felt to himself and his family could have been that he was worried about what the Israelis would do. And again, it's wild to even say this stuff.
I know.
But when you have someone who was at this high level of government with access to information that he had, who is suggesting this, you have to take it seriously. There were a number of other things that he said that were extremely interesting. He talked a lot about how there were people who were posting things online who seemed to have foreknowledge of the plot against Charlie and the ultimate murder of Charlie, and that was something he wanted to pursue that also was not allowed to be pursued. So that was very interesting. He also made this comment about how one tactic of the government is that they will stop providing any information to the public about something that the public is obviously very interested in and about which there should be more information. The Butler assassination being one example, Charlie Kirk's assassination being another example. And he said this will be done intentionally so that you get a lot of really crazy conspiracy theories. You know, the Egyptian planes and the French foreign lead, whatever, like all that stuff. And then it sort of discredits other avenues that you might pursue outside of the official narrative, because then you look like, all right, well, the official narrative seems more credible than whatever these crazy people are on about over here.
That is very important because, yes, if you just look at, you know, basically what's happened with Candace Owens is literally that, where they're not going to let anything out. No one's allowed to investigate anything about it. Then she goes in because it seems like she's the only one that cares enough to actually try and follow through with any sort of journalism, even if it is sensationalized and dips very heavily into any sort of conspiracy theory and lacks journalistic integrity that some other outlets may have. But she's just trying to chase down leads. Now, once again, she probably should wait a little bit and try and get some sort of double confirmation, that kind of stuff. But then, as soon as she comes out with whatever her theories are, then you see an immediate, everyone who I would label as basically propagandist talking heads in the space, right? In the same, you know, podcasts and alternative media, and you have all of them basically dogpile on her and call out how insane the claims are that she's making. So this is exactly, you can see just very proximately how you have seen this entire thing play out in the last couple months. So yes, this is an exact personification of this exact tactic. So yes, you're seeing it play out in real time if you've been following the whole Candace thing, because yeah, she would come out with a claim that you're like, all right, this may seem a little bit far-fetched, but she's just trying to exhaust all the leads that are presented to her, and then immediately everyone dogpiles on it, and then I think exactly so, with the intent of discrediting anything and everything, even though some of the things that she may have found that seemed a little bit more crazy, they may have been true. So I think it is very important that Joe Kent calls out that exactly this is a tactic that they use to try and basically quash any sort of finding out of what the actual truth is.
So he identifies that as a tactic in connection with these two events in particular, Butler and then Charlie Kirk's assassination. And yeah, I mean, the Butler thing is legitimately wild because here you have, you know, the guy who they tried to was, you know, almost killed in Butler, Pennsylvania. You would think that there would be a fulsome look, okay, who is this guy and where did he come from and what were his motivations? And that was also shut down. And they did very similar to the Epstein files, like, no, we looked into it, nothing to see here, we're all moving on.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the point where, look, again, I would not say any of this if he hadn't said it. I really wouldn't.
Yeah, no, we didn't do a lot of like Butler, you know, speculation or whatever.
Didn't see much. Seems believable. Crazy guy, does research, wants to shoot Trump. I mean, okay, you know, it makes sense. It's John Hinckley, right? You've seen it before.
Yeah.
It's not a crazy situation.
Country chalk.
I think there was a lot more to it. Like you saw basically the whole sloped roof excuse. They didn't have anyone on the roof because it was sloped, which made absolutely no sense whatsoever. Like they didn't secure the roof. There was someone visiting from or around. They tracked the cell signals of someone who was stationed right next to the FBI office in Washington, D.C., who traveled back and forth to basically meet with Thomas Matthew Crooks, basically traveling back and forth multiple times. Basically, his entire apartment was scrubbed, professionally cleaned, it appeared. His social media, they basically tried to cover up all of it, but then people went and ended up finding it because the internet is undefeated. So there were a lot of things that were very peculiar about it. But like I said before, they are trying to be taken seriously by people who, again, are politicians, are like, if they went down this rabbit hole, they would get smeared and then people would view them as Candace Owens, who like Candace Owens is not sitting down with any politicians. So whatever, they're trying to maintain access, I get it. But there were a lot of things about Butler where if you paid attention at all, it looked pretty weird. Like Thomas Matthew Crooks being in a commercial for I think it was like FBI or CIA or something. Like, again, a lot of really weird stuff that just didn't add up.
Full of guns
Right.
and mentally
Bingo.
unstable people. One of
Right.
them can get a shot off.
I mean, literally look at the guy, all right? He's a loser. And so, all right, I believe it. But then the National Counterterrorism Director, or NCTC Director, ODNI, highest security clearance in the world, exits the government and starts talking about it in the context of Trump's behavior vis-a-vis Israel. And you're like, holy shit, man. I mean, he is drawing a conclusion, which, look, he could be wrong, but he's got a lot more information than I do. And then he draws the Charlie Kirk situation into that as well. And he's like, maybe he feels like he's at threat. You know, another section, I don't know if you noticed, was him and Tucker talking about breaches in Trump's security. And so, I hadn't thought about this. They talked about Code Pink, being at a dinner. And we should actually ask Medea. We should just call her and ask her, Medea Benjamin, how she got access.
Did you know?
Because they were like, look, to us, that seemed like a huge crack in the president's security.
And just to remind people who may have forgotten, Trump showed up to have dinner at a local restaurant, and Code Pink activists had gotten a heads up that he was going to be going there, and they were inside of the restaurant,
and they had a reservation,
tables
so
away.
They knew it was coming.
Yeah, so this was, this was pre-planned. This wasn't just like, oh my God, there's the motorcade, let's go. This was a pre-planned protest, which is their right to do. But for the president's security, how that obviously raises crazy questions about how did they get access to this information. And then he mentioned another time when there was someone who was apparently just like a fan, but who wanted a handshake and was able to get to anticipate where Trump was going to be and be able to get right at him to get this handshake. Well, it's a supporter, so there's no harm that was done. But again, this is a massive security breach. So he intentionally raises those two things as what is going on.
I'm looking
there.
at this now. This is from 2015. NYPD suspends detective who snuck into the Ryder Cup pretending to be on Trump's security detail. I'll be honest. I mean, both of these are crazy. I was part of the White House press corps, and I had to go to restaurants when Trump would go dine. We didn't even know where he was going. They just said Trump is on his way to a restaurant. We're like, okay. We could assume. We thought usually it's the Trump Steakhouse, so that's what we would think, but we didn't know. So I was literally in the van behind the motorcade, and I didn't know where I was going for context. So how do other people know where he's going? Who tipped him off? I guess what they're saying is that in all of these, they're pointing to various different warnings. And look, I get it. This sounds like something out of a novel, like some Tom Clancy level nonsense, but he seems to believe it's real. And if he does, then maybe I should, and maybe all of you should. So,
well, and if you're trying to send a heavily veiled message of, we know where you're going, don't mess with us, but you don't want to do it as heavily as an assassination attempt, but we don't like what you're doing. Like, if you were to actually line up the timeline of, okay, why did this happen when it did? When did it happen? Why? What was going on globally? What were the decisions Trump was maybe looking into at these points in time? Like, if you were to actually line all of that up, that could tell a much more interesting story. So I would be very curious to see exactly, because I didn't follow the Code Pink thing particularly closely. I didn't pay attention to the fan that shook his hand. But if you were trying to send a heavily veiled message to him of, look, we're going to leak where you are going and what's going on and all these sorts of things, we know, and you don't want to do it, again, as blatantly as an assassination attempt, well, then you would do these sorts of things at very intentional points in time. Again, that's just how I'm immediately thinking about it as I'm hearing about it, but something that I think would be important to keep in mind. And again, given what Joe is saying in the interview, could line up in a very curious manner.
Yeah, wow. I just don't know. I mean, I will say for Joe, it's pretty clear he is desperate to try and get a message to Trump that you're being controlled by the Israelis. And he's begging him for an off-ramp and to try to get out of this. That seems to be his main goal in resigning. He said at the end, you hold the cards. But I do think it's a desperate cry for help at the end. That letter saying at the end, you have the cards. He's trying to like shake it. He's like, you have the cards. Like, you're in control.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah. Well, and the last thing I'll say.
And I don't think he does if it is Jeffrey Epstein. Once again, if it's just threats from Israel, and now with this coming out, you could go, literally, like I said, political assassination. We can cut you off. We can declare war on you. You're no longer an ally with us. We have really great relationships with the rest of the GCC. So that is a complete possibility. And by the way, Trump has declared war without congressional approval, so why wouldn't he be able to do it on Israel in this, it's an imminent threat. There is a political assassination. Whatever, right? He could justify it however he wants, unless they will release a bunch of damning Epstein files. And that's literally, again, I think everyone is trying, in his orbit, is trying so hard to persuade him in a certain way of saying, you, like they said, you hold the cards, you're the one that has the ultimate decision making on this, it's possible for you to get out of this. I think that's what they're trying to tell him, but I think they're not factoring in that he's 100% implicated in the Epstein files. And if that is the case, then of course he's not going to actually do anything about it. There's no amount of persuasion that would get him to believe that he could actually do this.
About it is, I raised this immediately, and I said something similar about Tucker. Like, I understand. First of all, I just want to say I really appreciate I think it takes a lot of courage to resign and to speak out in this way. And his life is about to be upended if it's not already. Sagar immediately called it, and sure enough, he's under investigation, threatened with indictment. They're going to do what they can to destroy this man. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And so we should all be grateful to him for coming forward and, making his concerns known. I think tactically he's decided, if you listen to this interview with Tucker, like, he is very, almost worshipful of Trump. Only Trump can get us, and his negotiating skills, and he's the whole reason why we had Iran at the table. Of course, I'm listening to this and going like, this is the same man who tore up the nuclear deal to come in with, so come on, right? But in any case, clearly this is his tactic, that he thinks if he's just sufficiently praiseful of Trump and tries to, word things properly so that his fragile ego isn't hurt and he gets the message in that he's being controlled and it's really not his fault and he could get, that maybe that's the way to have influence. And I think that ship has sailed. I think
here's the problem with her diagnosis of that. I don't think it has sailed. I think that has been the entire playbook all along. That's what everyone has said about Trump, is literally you just butter up his ego and you can get almost anything out of him that you want. And so, yes, I think that is, he has already done, he resigned because I think he realized, Joe Kent realized, that there's not anything else he can do from inside. He's obviously not listening to him. So this is literally, what can I do to get people to pay attention to me and pay attention to my message and hopefully tip the scales in a way and not spurn Trump at the same time. So yes, he is trying to, again, continually butter him up, not say negative things about him. That would basically get Trump to say, well, F that guy, and I'm not going to listen at all. So yes, it is literally, how can I draw the most attention possible to what I'm saying while not basically rejecting and turning away Trump at the same time. So I do not agree with her diagnosis of it. I think this was actually his best path forward. I think Tucker does it because she'll deride Tucker for the same thing. But it's like, look, with Charlie Kirk out of the picture, Tucker Carlson is probably the most anti-war person who has the greatest influence with Trump. Does it actually do anything? No, I think it has not. Once again, I think that is because of the Epstein files and that Trump is most likely implicated in them, and the Mossad and Israel have awful things on him. So will any of it ultimately make a difference at all? I think not. But these are literally the last remaining people who have a voice and can stand up against it. And so to basically get Trump to completely turn on them and, not listen to them at all, again, the entire playbook is that this is the way that you get Trump to actually go along with what you're saying. So yeah, I just don't buy into. I get it because she's also super pissed off. She hates Trump, and she may view it as just like burn all the bridges. But that's not been the way to get anything you want. And I think as Trump is getting older and more senile, and you don't get more open to alternative thoughts, and like you're not more open to criticism as you get older. You get more dug in, and so by spurning Trump and turning your back on him and going burn all the bridges, burn all the boats, you're not going to achieve anything.
At this point, your best weapon right now in this fight is the full, unvarnished truth. And because there continues to be very clearly a level of, a layer here of I don't want to say deception because that's too strong of a word, but he's holding back that criticism of Trump because he's trying to play this game of persuading Trump, and it's still sort of an inside game. It does take some away from the power of his testimony, because if he's sort of choosing his words and being, not fully forthcoming in that regard, then of course it naturally raises questions for people. Okay, well, if you're not being totally upfront about the guy who actually got us into this war, then how can we trust that you're being truly upfront about these other extraordinary claims that you're making in this interview? So that would be my view is, I understand you're trying to preserve Trump's ego so that maybe he'll hear this message. I understand, potentially you want to run for, or you want to, maintain support and credibility with the Trump base, and Trump is like a god, their cult leader or whatever. So that's tricky to walk that line as well. But I think the most powerful thing you can do right now is just be fully truthful. And yes, the Israelis have wanted this war. They have wanted this war for a long time. They've tried to manipulate a lot of presidents into this war, but this president is the one who said yes. And this president is the one who shut you out after the 12-day war and did not want to hear the other side anymore. This president is the one who took $150 million from Miriam Adelson. This president is the one who created a culture of sycophancy around him so that, reportedly even, General Kane, who he handpicked, et cetera, didn't feel comfortable enough really telling him and sort of used these proxies or hinted at what trouble could come with the Iran war. Trump is responsible here. He is not some victim of happenstance. He is not some poor baby lamb who had no idea and just got walked into this thing and there was nothing he could do. He is the most powerful man on the planet. He is the president of a nuclear-armed superpower. And ultimately, yes, the Israelis were doing what the Israelis have long been doing. The responsibility lies with him. And I think that until there's full candor on that point, it will somewhat diminish the power of the rest of the testimony here, which is so vitally important as we face down what exactly this war is going to mean.
That's fair.
And like I said, the only thing is that you have to, and I think at this point you pretty much have to just weigh it in and assume that Trump's actions are basically because of the Epstein files. Once again, that's the only thing that makes any logical sense to me anymore, because yes, he has, yes, he was donated to by Miriam Adelson. Yes, Israel is constantly in his ear, but I think overall, because I think Trump did have a very good relationship with Tucker Carlson, but even Tucker going to the White House multiple times, being allowed in, it did not move the needle with him. So when you're seeing it and when you're reading, again, it's a big picture that you have to look at it. But when you're looking at him throwing people under the bus, he realizes that it's not popular. But he has to go along with it. And when you, again, take a step back and go, what would compel him that he had to have known this was going to be at least somewhat the outcome. Like, it obviously would not be, like, he talked to people, it's very well known that, okay, Iran can close the Strait of Hormuz. It's very well known that they have missile capacity to hit at least the GCC and probably Israel. It's very well known, like, there are all these things that he absolutely had knowledge of. And so to make decisions flying in the face of all of that, there's only one conclusion that you can come to. And again, I think in time, it will maybe get brought out and exposed, and I will be proven right once again, as it seems like I have been on a lot of things, but that's the only conclusion that I can come to. It's the only one that makes any sense, and it's the only one that when you're looking at all these things where you go, yes, it's head-scratching why he's making these decisions, it's head-scratching while the people who are in office, like Joe Kent and these others, are still trying to be friendly with him and will not just go full scorched earth because they know, okay, we can try and sway him. But at the end of the day, why is he continuing to make these decisions in this way when everyone else seems to be saying, even the military-industrial complex does not seem to be fully on board with what's going on in Iran right now? And so when you are seeing that, what other explanation do you have? But if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you have made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.